selling it through a third party, you're not really going to be making much on that particular book if you sell it for the same price that Amazon is asking for. But even still, like, the only thing really that bookstores can do is
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday Fireside Chat. And I'm your friendly chief librarian here at Alexandria RPG. Reminder, I'm not a real librarian, I just LARP as one. And with me today is Nathan Maher, a game designer and author. And what would you like to say cool about yourself starting off there, Nathan?
Oh, geez, let's see. I've been writing since, I mean, I was little, but I didn't actually start self-publishing until about 2010. I've made several RPGs since then, from a very terrible but yet free RPG called Sticks and Stones. You can find that on Drive-Thru RPG. But then I moved into Spooks, Welcome to the Great Beyond, The Mortal Intrusion, Lights Out. I also have like one that I haven't published yet, and I don't know when I'll be publishing it. But I am also working on the second edition of the RPGs that I mentioned, sans the free one.
So, what is your current project?
Uh, the main one that I'm working on is just getting the rules to Spooks Welcome to the Great Beyond updated to the second edition. I've separated the core rules to make just a blank rule set. You can purchase the book separately. I try to make that one as cheaply as possible, so the digital downloads will be super cheap. The books will be practically down to the manufacturing costs, and the whole purpose of that is so that people can get their hands on the rules, and there's going to be an open game license for it, so people can run with it, do whatever they want with it, as long as it's Uh, Nothing too outrageous, but uh, then I'm going to be moving on to making new systems and campaign settings and making those available to people too. So the whole goal is that maybe 2023, we'll have to see, is there will be a Kickstarter for some artwork for the core rule set, Spooks Welcome to the Great Beyond, and I think there's going to be the I guess what you would be called the successor to the Mortal Intrusion, which is going to be called X Grade. It's kind of like a combination of XCOM, but in high school, and people get to play as like different types of supernatural beings, and they have to fight against alien menaces or secret societies, that sort of thing. Just anything that's there to ruin their high school years.
I thought just going to high school ruined your high school years.
It did indeed. But if you're supernatural, adds a new flavor to it.
Okay. Well, that sounds like all the kids that I played that tried to get me into playing Vampire the Masquerade in high school. They all thought that was
Yes.
supernatural.
Much could be said about certain LARP groups with the World of Darkness crowd.
Yes.
They're very interesting people, and I do love them a lot.
So your Spooks game just closed not too long ago on Kickstarter, correct?
It's almost 10 years since it closed. It's been a long time. It seems
Oh,
like
wow.
it was yesterday, but yeah, it was. It's basically you're
Kickstarter's
dead,
been
and it's
around
set in
for
the
10 years.
afterlife. Longer, I think. We're all getting old.
Yeah.
Back in the
Somebody
day
in
of
chat
Nokia
says,
phones.
World of Darkness LARPs. We don't talk about World of Darkness LARPs. I totally understand why the people that got into the World of Darkness LARPing and stuff loved it, and I get that. It just was never a thing for me. And like going back and reading through the books, I'm like, oh, this is a really cool world. I just could never get into it.
I think, if it's organized well. I went to one where there was only one storyteller and there was 30 people, so you could probably imagine how well that went.
Yes. Um, so Lights Out's your most recent game that you've put out, right?
Yeah. Lights Out, I would say, is my favorite one, just because it targets more of a middle grade uh, demographic. So you could be anywhere from the age of like 6 and up. Like I started playing tabletop role playing games when I was 10, but as long as you have that level of comprehension and an adult who can walk you through it, then it's a very simple game to play. And it's also been appealing to adults who want to recapture their childhood. I've ran a couple games, and it turned out that they weren't really interested so much in the plot, but more interested in just being a kid and just doing kid things. Instead of going off and chasing after the monsters that existed, they were more interested in installing like a zip line from the top of their house down to a tree and like throwing down mattresses and charging the neighborhood kids for each ride that they go on. So you could do anything with it. It's a very fun game.
Nice. Yeah, I'm always looking for games that are great to suggest to parents, to kids, to get them in. Because we were just at a small local convention yesterday, and somebody's like, "Oh, my kid's 6, but they're really great at math, so they're going to be great with D&D." I was like, "Well, try to find something that is going to get them not only into the math rock portion, but into the role playing portion, so that you can kind of get them both aspects." So I was like, D&D can be really good at one or the other, and you get kids that really into the role play, not so good in the math end or the mechanics end, or you get kids that really will grasp the concepts of the mechanics but struggle with the role play type stuff. I was like, so I always like to direct parents towards those kid-oriented RPGs to at least get them going before they throw them at a fully fledged, mechanics-heavy RPG.
Right? It can be intimidating when you have so many different rules, especially if it's set in where people are supposed to be adults. in a fantasy setting that has all those different rules and classes and races and things that you can pick and choose. But if you're not quite being engrossed into the world, not grasping your character, not building on the person that you're trying to play, and you're too much focused on like the numbers, then yeah, you're going to miss some of the aspects and the importance of the game. And I think that that'll resonate with the people that you play with too. I'm
Yes.
sure that you and have been in those games where it's nothing but combat heavy, and you kind of miss the story, and you kind of miss the plot, and you miss the interactions between one another, and it's
Yeah, I always tell people, I was like, you've got your ends of the spectrum. You've got your ROLL players and your ROLE players. So, are you a dice chucker or are you a LARPer? You know, those are the most of us kind of fall somewhere here in the middle. But you know, you will find those people that live on the peripheries, and it's like if you just all about the dice, then you know, let's find you a tabletop minis game. If you're
right.
all about the role play, let's get you in some theater classes. Or vice versa. If you love the dice, let's get you in a theater class, and then we'll bring you to the middle. And if you're the drama student that just happens to play role playing games, let's get you in some tabletop minis and kind of drag you both back to the middle somewhere. And you'll find more groups to play with too.
Right. It's versatility and that willingness to be open to new things. And that's one of the problems with the Dungeons and Dragons crowds. There's so many people who are diehard Dungeons and Dragons, nothing else, won't ever pick up another book. And I guess that's okay in certain aspects. But I think it's really nice to see the other systems that are out there. Like I probably when I first started, I would have never picked up like a book such as like Tales from the Loop. We were talking about Free League just not too long ago. Tales from the Loop is a fantastic system and a fantastic setting, and I absolutely adore it. I haven't been able to play in it, but I have read the book, and it's something that I think a lot of people need to look into. It's just find those additional loves outside of the fantasy genre.
Absolutely. Have you read the Tales from the Flood book?
I haven't.
So it's the story continues, but you're now like late teens, early 20s.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I'll have
And
to look that one up.
yeah, in Tales from the Loop, if I recall correctly, you character like they're your kids and you can't die, which is kind of a neat aspect in the game. But in Tales from the Flood, the thing that was preventing you from dying is no longer, you know, applicable. So your characters can now die because you're now adults.
Hmm.
So all the things that killed off the adults in the original game can now affect you.
I know with Tales from the Loop, it focuses primarily on like the strange like centrifuge, or it's kind of like a hadron collider that's in the town, and all
Mm.
the parents are completely uh, what's a good word for it? Just they don't see any of the bad things that are happening in the town, and they don't believe the kids, and there's just no support, and then the kids have to figure it out themselves. But not having that permadeath, which I enter, of course, in Spooks Welcome to the Great Beyond, there's really no permadeath unless certain special things happen in the game session. But I think that not worrying about death allows people to focus more on their characters and taking those risks that they wouldn't normally take with their characters, such as I'm not opening that door, we'll let the thief go first, versus like, no, my character's headstrong and doesn't believe that anything can hurt him, so he's just going to open the door and find out what's going to happen, and lo and behold, something bad does happen.
Yeah, and that's one thing I love is I like getting games that are all different like there's different ways to play games. So I mean, to the people out there that only want to play D&D, I get sad and frustrated with that because there's so much more to play. Because like with Tales from the Loop, so you're there's no permanent death, or old role playing game Toon from Steve Jackson games. You know, if your Toon is killed, they're just knocked out for 3 minutes, and sit there with stars or birdies twirling around over your head, and then you come back into the game like a cartoon would. And I love getting these people that have only played, these fantasy RPGs with tons of combat, and bring them into other games that are more storytelling driven. Or I talk about often the game Dread, and your character when the Jenga tower falls, your character doesn't necessarily die. They just leave the story.
Hmm.
And so that leaves up to be creative for the GM to go, ooh, how do I want to deal with this? Like, do I kill them? Is this a situation where they're just taken to a parallel universe or whatever I want to go on? So it just opens up the door for more stuff to happen. And I really dig when game systems do stuff like that, and it also opens the door for players to be more creative. And then when they go back to playing their standard, fantasy RPG, maybe they'll be more creative in that game as well.
Right. So true.
Uh, so, what was your first RPG that you played?
I played probably the worst uh, combination of advanced Dungeons and Dragons ever. I learned about it through a friend, and the first book that we got was Skills and Powers, which is a player's option. It had no information on classes, barely any information on races. There was no spells, and so we still made a game based upon that. And then we're like, oh well, we need to go find a book that has spells in it. So the obvious choice was to go find the player's handbook, but instead I grabbed the Unearthed Arcana and went from there. So it was interesting trying to build that world based off just those two books, but we made a go of it and we had a lot of fun.
And I always love hearing stories like that because there's so many times that I've over the years, I've jumped into games totally not knowing anything about it and trying to just piece together a game. And I remember as a kid trying to make my own games. Marvel and DC had collectible cards in the 90s, and just sitting down trying to figure out how to make a card game out of those. And then meeting people. Had a friend, his dad worked at Wizards Coast, and he was like, hey, look at this, what we're working on. And it was Magic the Gathering, and he's like, you guys would actually like collect cards and play with them? I was like, man, we're already trying to do that. Like, we have we have collectible cards that we're trying to figure out how to make a game with. And at the time he was just confused with the whole collectible card idea. And then you look at all the people over the years that have had a book or something that they want to make a game out of. I mean, we did it with growing up cops and robbers and stuff like that. And you watch a TV show, now you're playing as those, but you were getting all the wrong books and trying to make a game out of it.
Yup. I can't tell you how many times that I've looked at like a movie or a TV show and I'm like, how would I make this into a tabletop role-playing game? What mechanic stands out to me the most that would really embody this? In fact, I wrote up an entire, it was like close to 350 pages, BioShock tabletop role-playing game. I obviously can't release it because I don't have permissions or licenses or anything along those lines, but there's so many other people who design stuff like that, and I was looking at what they made, and I wasn't quite happy with the creation of it, but it's trying to be able to find a setting or a world that everybody adores, especially in your friends group, and then bringing your friends into it to be able to have that fun time outside of just creating something generic that you find off of a bookshelf.
Absolutely. And I mean, any of us that are into RPGs, we've probably sat down and go, "Ooh, hey, how could I do this?" And I'm weird because running the library, I have experience with tons and tons of systems. Sometimes I'll go, "I wonder what system would fit this best,"
Yup.
uh, because you have a ton of open systems, and you're like, "Oh, hey, was this a good D6 system, or is this an OSR setting? Is this something I could use from this?" And it's great. And you were talking about fan made. We actually talked to a couple people that run a site that has a fan made Legend of Zelda RPG that
Oh,
is
that's cool.
better. Like when you download it and you look at it, if that was printed, it'd be better than most RPGs that come out today. Like in its quality and how it's put together and everything.
Yeah, it's there's so many times that especially with indie developers and with all the open systems that you look at a game and they're like, oh, it's got 150 pages, it's it's 9.99, and then you download it and the editing's cheap and the the sentence structures are poor and the mechanics don't work, and it's like you got some great ideas, but I don't think you're quite done here.
Yeah. And
So it's kind of a
talking of,
crapshoot.
so we got this in the library yesterday. I never knew this existed. We were talking about, because there's all kinds of RPGs made off of books or movies and TV shows and books and stuff. And it was even done back in the day, because this is one that I show regularly.
Okay.
Yes, that was made in 1980, but this was made just a couple years ago.
Okay.
Leverage was a bit. It was a big. In fact, it's got a spin-off TV show now, and there's a Leverage role-playing game. I was like, what the hell? and it uses a generic system. It uses the Cortex system. And I mean, this came out in. Was this really seriously 2010? I thought this was newer than that, but yeah, 2010. God, this is a 12-year-old
Wow.
RPG now. But I mean, West End Games that did Star Wars and was killing it with Star Wars for years, did Torg and all this. They also did Men in Black, Species, Tank Girl. So I think there are a lot of companies out there that have people that work for them that are sitting there going, I really wonder what we could do with this TV show. Like, oh hey, I really love this show. Can we make this into a role-playing game? Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones was made by TSR and West End Games. And yes, if you didn't know Tank Girl was a game, Tank Girl's a game.
I picked up Xena and Hercules role-playing game.
Also West End
Not too long
Games.
ago.
Uses the same rules
It's just like,
as...
wow.
Yep, uses the same rules as Star Wars and Men in Black. So technically, you could have Xena fighting Darth Vader. There are rules for it. Or Agent J facing Hercules.
It makes sense.
It's West End Games, especially towards the end, were doing so many bonkers things, and I loved them for it. It was great.
The ability to just go out and grab all those licenses and be able to talk to executives and they say, yes, this is a great idea, go for it, is just blows my mind.
Yeah. Well,
I'm sure it was easier back then.
Yeah. Well, West End Games, they started with Paranoia, and then they got the rights to do Ghostbusters really cheap. Like a year after the Ghostbusters movie, long before the second one came out. And then with the success of that, they spent a boatload of money to get the Star Wars one, which really, I mean, the Star Wars one is the reason why we have the expanded universe, all that. All the Timothy Zahn was actually mailed the books for the role-playing game books before he started writing his books, all of that. But it definitely opened the window for people to do stuff like that, because they were like, oh, look, this is successful. Because, I mean, people were doing it prior, with stuff like Dallas, but this didn't really make any money.
What? That looks like top notch right there.
Oh, it's top notch. Well, and even with it's funny because, I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax went to Hollywood trying to get movies made, and that's how we got the cartoon. So they were trying to do the other thing. They were like, hey, we're successful with this game, let's do other stuff. And we got all kinds of really bad things like Shrinky Dinks, and they'd slap the D&D logo on anything.
Well, it's kind of like what they did with Friday the 13th when it was doing so well as a movie slasher franchise, and then they just slapped it on a TV show that had absolutely nothing to do with Jason Voorhees, but yet it still did well. Just trying to get that name on there.
Yeah, well, and sadly there's a lot of that within Hollywood nowadays. Like, oh, we just need to we need to do something with this IP so we can try to make money, or we can hold on to the IP. It's stretch it a little longer. It's like, oh, and we get lots of and we got all the Disney live action remakes that they're doing. Oh,
They're just making sure they keep those copyrights as long as they possibly can.
Oh well, Disney's messed up the copyright laws for so bad that they'll nothing will run out of copyright now. Uh,
Although Winnie the Pooh is available, just don't put him in a red shirt and you're fine.
yeah. Keep him out of China, and China won't come after you. Which I find hilarious that um, Xi Jinping hates Winnie the Pooh because people keep comparing him to him.
It's like there could be worse characters you could be compared to.
Yeah,
Far
exactly.
worse.
Somebody was talking about in the
Just
chat was
roll
talking
with it.
about Dark Souls, the Dark Souls RPG, and so I have to give. What's the company that just did that? They've been doing minis for years, and they've done other RPGs. Okay, hang on, I gotta look up the name of the company real quick. That's gonna drive me nuts. Because there was a big Steamforged, Steamforged. Uh, so they put out the book, and like when it went to the printer ended up like merging a couple different uh, editions.
Oh
So,
no.
like, there was armor that came standard with a starting class that the starting class couldn't use. All kind. There was just tons of. It was riddled with errors and everything, and then everything was printed. So, Steamforged said, "Hey, we're gonna bite the bullet on this one." So they had everything. They went back and cleaned everything up. They had it all reprinted. The only people that had copies in hand were the people that got the collector's editions. They just sent them all brand new collector's editions, everything. So they just redid the entire product line, which, and I know it cost them a ton of money, but it was the right thing to do.
Right?
And it's so rare when a company does that. Because I even said, live on the air, I said, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know, like, because that's an insane amount of money. They're going to probably just send out PDFs or whatever of the corrections. They said, nope, we're scrapping it and starting over. And I was like, what? Okay, somebody asked, can you tell us more about Spooks Second Edition?
Yeah, so there was a lot of things with Spooks that I wanted to do because after making Lights Out, there was some rule changes that I implemented, such as in Spooks Welcome to the Great Beyond, you don't have any wounds. You just base off hit points. Hit points reach to 0, and then you faint. In Lights Out, there is a synergy deck where you draw cards, kind of like you do in Spooks, but those represent your wounds. And so anytime that your hit points drop to 0, as long as you have your at the time I was calling them synergy points, you could spend those to take a card out of your hand, and then you heal up that many hit points. But then you have a wound, and you have less cards that you draw. But those same cards you would use to be able to boost your rolls and so on and so forth. But you could still boost your rolls in Spooks. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the spell card system, where in Spooks, if you're not familiar with it, it's based off of playing card deck. Any card deck would do. I made some that look like the cards from the game, but you don't need them. You can use just any poker deck. But each card represented a spell, and each character had a hand side based upon their level. And so if you had like 5 cards in your hand, then you get to pick the spells from that hand that you could cast during that round. To pick the spells from that hand that you could cast during that round, or you could shuffle them in and out. But then you could sacrifice one to boost your rolls, so on and so forth. But so I wanted to separate that because it seemed like there was putting a lot of emphasis on the spell card deck and not a lot of emphasis in the wounds. So I made it so that people could have a wound system for Spooks so that they could decide whether or not to heal themselves immediately and take a wound and then have to regenerate that later on. And then instead of using poker decks for the spell cards, I shifted to a tarot deck, which of course, going from 52 to I think it's 74 74, 76, somewhere in there, to a tarot deck size. That's a huge difference. So I had to make up brand new spells for each deck. There's one deck called the Bone deck, and there's one called the Spider deck, and each one has a certain theme, and each spell is unique. So that's what I did. I've adjusted that. I've expanded the rules on the Dream Veil, which gives a more in-depth look at what happens if you enter into a dream. How can you pull things out of the dream world to use in the real world, or the afterlife in this case? Or what happens if one of the dreams start to collapse? How can you communicate with the dreamer? So I also went in and I stripped out all the H.P. Lovecraft stuff. It's like, I love Call of Cthulhu. I just think that there's other people who could do it better than I can.
And since it became most of it became an open, why can I never remember that term?
Public domain.
Public domain. Yeah, since most of it became public domain, so many people have. I mean, we've seen a giant leap in the amount of Lovecraft based stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of people love it, and I think that it's cool, and I love the H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos. But at the same time, I think it also can bog down a game if it's not focused on that. Like if you look at, gosh, what is it? It's not Call of Cthulhu that's done by Chaosium, but the one that's done by the Modifius. The
Achtung Cthulhu?
Yeah, that one. Like that one's World War II, specialized in Cthulhu. I think it's great. It's very themed to that. But
Yeah.
if you're just sprinkling it in here and there, it kind of feels a little irrelevant. You know,
Okay.
it's not as important. So instead, I stripped out Narlithotep as being one of the main antagonists, and I added a few additional ones. Like there's a prince who rules the Hellfire lands, who has his own temple, and I made him more of a prominent figure as far as what's his goal and where's his aims. And I had also released a magazine called Dead Living Magazine, which was supposed to be just like a small supplement for Spooks Welcome Great Beyond, which focused on the Mask of the Red Death and Edgar Allan Poe's writings. And so I incorporated all that into the newer edition so that people could see where they could take a chronicle that direction. And I stripped out all the NPCs and the monsters from the core Spooks Welcome to the Great Beyond rulebook, and now it's going to be in its own book called the Book of Breathing. And instead of just having blurbs on the NPCs' obituaries, there's going to be full statistics as well as what they're doing in the afterlife. So it really kind of adds more to the world. And then the monsters are going to go back into at the end of the Book of Breathing. I'm going to expand that as well. So it's basically cleaning up everything, adding a couple additional new rules, adding more content.
And I mean, so I kind of want to go back. So you said you'd been using a standard deck of cards, but you've moved over to get more spells in. You moved over to the tarot deck, and my only concern on anybody using the tarot deck is the accessibility of getting one versus most everybody has a deck of cards in the house.
Right. So here's my what I plan to do is that if people can't go out and buy, because I'm going to actually make a physical tarot deck that can actually go with the game. So it's going to have all the spell descriptions written out on the tarot decks, and it'll have the numbers on it, and you can just go out and you can buy it and you can use it with the game. But I also know that a lot of people don't have money. Especially nowadays with how COVID is, we're looking to moving into a recession. Sales and retail are down. So I'm going to make a print version available where you could just print them out and just attach them to an index card and cut them out if you want.
Okay.
And it's going to cost you far less. And that way you could just make your own tarot deck and you don't have to put a lot of money into it.
Good, I like that, because that's always my concern with anybody that's moving over to a tarot deck is you're now taking everybody a step away from what they have in the house, and I say that when we use math rocks of all different types, but
Yep.
you can now get these at the dollar store. you can get a set of dice at the dollar store. Um, and I always have a little a little place in my heart for games that are based on the D6, just because it's so easy. Everybody has six-sided dice in the house. I guarantee it. But I love what you're doing with the ability to just be able to print it off, glue it to a set of index cards, because you can get a pack of index cards fairly cheap, and then there you go. I love that. That's a great idea. So it allows you to expand your game and make it accessible.
And with the open game license, if you like the decks, you could just make your own. You just get some index cards, you write out your spells, and then you just distribute those amongst your friends, and you're good. Or you could even publish them if you want, and make them readily available for everyone. That's my ultimate goal, because I've come to the realization 10 years ago, I was like, haha, this book will be fantastic, and I will get a lot of people to buy it, and they will love me for it. And that's not, I think that's what everybody thinks when they first create their RPG and they make it available to the public. But we also have to realize too that we're just one person, and there's just no way that we can create all the content that people want. It's just impossible. So if you just leave it up to other people to do,
Yeah,
it's great.
and exactly, it's
With your occasional publication.
yeah, and making it so that anybody can be able to help build out your world is always a great idea. Some people are thoroughly afraid of it. They're like, oh, it's going to get away from me. Other people are going to make money off of what I've done. I was like, I look at people that are making small games. I think the best response I had from somebody, I was asked, because I've run into a lot of people like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a ton of money off this, and I've asked a few people like, do you plan on making money? And my favorite answer was like, I'd be happy to be able to make one car payment off this. And
well, I
like
mean, you look at Drive Through RPG.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Drive Through RPG, their medal system. If you look at the majority of the games that are available on Drive Through RPG that haven't even received a medal yet, that's like 50. You have to sell 50 just to get one medal. And they're like, when most people don't get this far.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're only going to sell like 50 copies.
It sounds sad. You're like, oh man, they didn't even sell 50 copies. It was like, but if you look at how many games that are on Drive-Thru RPG, I mean, just pull up Kickstarter and type in tabletop RPG and see that there's 100 on there right now. So we're all going after a very, niche audience. Is it a growing audience? Yes, but it's still a niche audience. No matter how much some people don't want to admit that it is, it is. But it's it is crazy to think that people put things on up on Drive-Thru RPG, and somebody mentioned in the chat, says even on Twitch, a successful channel has 6 consistent viewers. It's funny because
you've made it. Congratulations.
Yeah, we don't have a huge. We've got 200 followers. We've got a handful of subscribers, and we stream fairly regularly. And it's funny the amount of offers we get. Like Raid Shadow Legends is like, hey, if you do ads for us, or the food delivery service like HelloFresh, I'm like none of those, and I don't think we'd ever make money off it, because people that watch have to actually click through and subscribe via our links, and I was like, I don't think it's worth it. So we it's funny to think of what is successful in this industry on the small side of things. Like on Drive-Thru, 50 selling 50 is bonkers. Like how many Kickstarters don't fund that, and some of them I've gotten a chance to look at some of the games that don't fund, and they're just mechanically just beautiful games. And was like, wow, you guys have come up with some amazing rules that I've not really seen done this way before, or you've taken some cool ideas from other places and combined them in this better thing. And then they get eight people that back them on Kickstarter. I'm just like, oh.
Kudos to those 8 people, though.
Yes. And it's so hard to get a product out there, and it's bonkers to think about I talked to game designers that, much younger than me, that didn't go to conventions in the 80s and 90s, and see how it was done back then. If you were an indie game designer back then, you made your game, you went somewhere and got them like printed, and you stapled them together. You made them into little booklets or pamphlets. You made your own zines, and then you rented a table at a convention, and you sold them for $1 a piece, hoping that people would buy it,
Yep.
and then write back to you because your address would be on the back, or hopefully a game designer would pick it up and go, "Oh yeah, we want to hire you for our company," and that was the industry for up until the 2010.
It's like, do you have 1 million followers yet? Nowadays, it's like, have you gotten enough? It's like that's when we'll start looking at your stuff seriously. But until then,
Yeah, and that's sad because we end up passing over probably amazing people for popular people. And I get sad because I see, some people I know in that are in the industry as indies that have made some great things that will probably never get hired because they're just not popular enough. And
right?
and you're just like, you're looking through, you're like, oh, you do some amazing work. And and I try to, when I run into somebody that I think is very undervalued, I try to talk them up to people I know within the industry, like, hey, this person has some really cool work that you should check out. And the paid portion of the industry is so small that it's interesting because within the industry there's so many people that know each other. So if you can get somebody's name kind of out there and somebody looks at it, they'll be like, well, this isn't for me, maybe somebody else over here, maybe this company over here, because they'll talk to each other all the time. It amazes me how tiny this industry is. Once you're in it.
It's like all doors open once you're in it. But you also have to, like, for the small people, like I've been in it for, I wouldn't say I'm in it, but I'm part of the process at least. I've been going to conventions, I've been showing my wares, I've been talking with people, and you have to find that love, and you have to change your expectations. Like, my expectations when I first published my first one was like, hey, I'm going to probably sell 100 copies physically within the first 3 months on my own, and it's just like, no, that didn't happen. I still have like 60 of them sitting over here, right next to me, and it's like, if I can sell 1 or 2 per convention, that to me is success, because you're able to at least get into somebody's home, and then they'll talk to somebody else about it. They may not necessarily buy it, but at least your name gets out there and your stuff gets out there.
And I know a couple people that did well on their Kickstarters, and then while they were talking to the printers, they paid out of pocket personally to like double the size of their order so that they could get a cheaper rate. And now we're sitting on extra $1,500, and they're like, oh god, what do I do with these? And then now they're disheartened because they're sitting on a ton of books. They're like, I can't do anything with these. And it's like, yes, you can. It's just going to take time. You have a built-in fan base from your Kickstarter. Hopefully, now that everybody got their books. And somebody also brought up drive-through RPG. So if you've been successful on Kickstarter and then you move your product over to drive-through doesn't count that towards your. So you may have 200 sales on your Kickstarter and 8 on drive-through, but that's 208, not 8.
Right? Like I have
wonder if because there's a lot of people that are a lot of smaller Kickstarters I see, and I like this. They're doing a cheaper level on their Kickstarter that has a print on demand. Say, hey, you get a print on demand coupon at this level so that you can do a drive-through RPG print on demand at cost, which I think is really cool. So you pay cost, so it's your ultimate purchase price of the book is whatever you paid on Kickstarter plus the print on demand cost, I wonder if those actually count towards your drive-through RPG sales. Because if
I
so,
would
that
suspect.
go ahead.
I did learn that with digital sales, at least, if you're selling them, they have to be at least 20 cents.
Yeah,
So if you're making 20 cents on the purchase, then it counts. But if it's free, like if you just do it at cost, then it probably won't count. But if you do manufacturing at cost plus 20 cents, then I think it would count.
I'm gonna have to contact the people I know at drive-through and find out some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. Because Roll20 has been awesome to the library, giving us accounts. Now Roll20 is in with part of the One Bookshelf company in a merger, which I think is actually kind of cool. Um, I've got contacts at One Bookshelf now, which is very entertaining. It's weird to think that I'm building up these contacts within these companies, all through just sharing people's work.
Then you get those affiliate codes, and then you pop that up on your
Oh,
station, and maybe get yourself $5 here and there.
I would love some affiliate codes. Maybe I should talk to Drive Through
I think
RPG,
any,
see if I could get some affiliate codes.
I think it's right at the bottom. You log in, it's right
Yeah,
at the bottom that says affiliate. You click on it. I do it from time to time. I don't get a lot of people.
yeah. Um, I'm gonna have to ask them. Um, let's see. So, talked about Spook Second Edition a little bit. Love the idea
Yeah.
of how you're making the tarot accessible for people that want to play but can't necessarily afford it. Somebody in the chat asked about X grade.
Yeah. So, like when I first was doing spooks, the artist and I had a conversation, Toby White, about trying to make a modern setting. But we wanted to make it so that it was a little bit more open because we co-wrote it, uh, which focused on the different eras, 10-year decades throughout the system. So you could play something like the 1920s, you could play something 1940s, 1950s. But there were a lot of things about Mortal Intrusion that I liked, and there was a few things that I didn't like. And it was it was more that it was so focused on like the military aspects, the agents in the background, the men in black, and there wasn't really a lot of, I guess, story to it. And I wanted something in the newer edition that not only reflected the Mortal Intrusion, but kind of rebranded itself. And that's where I decided to work with X Grade. So in Mortal Intrusion, you could play Divergence, you could play normal humans if you wanted to. I don't know why you would want to, but that option is available. But you can also play as like the religious chosen, or the Indiana Jones type, or somebody who descended from the fairies, or you could play as a werewolf type creature or a magi, and those were all really cool. Everything but the fairies didn't quite fit into the X grade idea, because I'm going to just shift the fairies over into the invisible world, which I was trying to write for the first edition, never got around to it. So I'm definitely going to be working on that next, right after X grade. But uh, X grade focuses on you're a teenager, because the age up rules is what I'm calling the rule system for the all the books that I'm doing. But it's designed so that you can play as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, an aged adult, or an elder. And each time you age uh, in those categories, you gain new abilities. And so, and now the other thing to keep in mind too is that you could still be an old person, but have a low level, because the idea is that you really haven't had anything exciting happen to you until just recently, and that's where your levels are coming from. Or if you're a child, you've been going through a lot, and so just this last year, you've been through, the Tartarus and back, and so you have like all these levels that now allow you to fit within this campaign setting. But so it's going to focus a lot on teenagers, that you're in a school, and the idea focuses on uh, all my love of the XCOM games, where you could build your own base, and each building that you have adds, certain bonuses. So you can adds to your research, it adds to the ability to manufacture things, or you can gain access to different technologies or hire some henchmen or whatnot. That's so there's going to be that small mini game where you get to build onto your school using the monies that you get through sponsors, such as either corporations or secret organizations or even the government. There's but you get to play as all the ones I mentioned, sans the Feyken, but you also get to play as beings who have either been cursed or descended from certain cryptids. Like you could play as a sibling or a child of the Mothman if you wanted to, or like the creature from the blue or the Black Lagoon, you could play as something like that, or the Sasquatch, or then I also have your alien types, those who are like alien human hybrids that you could play as well. And but your whole goal is, of course, to try to keep yourself hidden from the general public. So there's going to be like this awareness level based upon the things that you do in your adventures, and your whole goal is to try to keep the awareness level down so you don't attract the attention of different organizations that are either after you or like, for example, there's one alien species who's slowly trying to take over the world through mental domination. And so it has its own men in black that it sends out after people who create too much commotion or draw too much attention to themselves, because they don't want the world to be aware of what's happening in the background and in the shadows. But so there's that aspect. There's the ability to research new technologies that you recover from other people and incorporate that into your game. So you can start off in like the 1950s if you really wanted to, and you could discover laser weapons, and you could start manufacturing those laser weapons in like your shop class, and then you're using that to defeat monsters or alien invasions, or even creatures that are like evil creatures that are coming from the afterlife trying to come back into the real life as the undead. So it's trying to make it, but it's also lighthearted. It's not as dark as you would find like in the World of Darkness or some of the other dark fantasy games. It's supposed to be there to have fun and you just kind of play with it.
I want the shop class that could make lasers. My shop class
Right?
can make lasers.
I made a chisel. I mean, that was pretty cool. But
I in my wood shop I made little rolling duckies for my niece. Uh, not quite the same thing.
well, everybody's got their own threat level,
Beware the evil duck. Well, we all know you never pick up a duck in a dungeon. Uh,
right?
Reference to
You'll lose a level. That's what you'll do.
reference to Munchkin.
Munchkin, yeah.
Um, there's a lot of the side chat on what you've been talking about. Um, I think there's some really cool concepts. Is there any one thing that you would like to dig in a little more deeper on that you were just talking about?
Um, One of the things that I try to focus on with this age up system is in like Dungeons and Dragons where you're trying to build a monster, and the higher level your characters are, the longer it takes you to build a monster or to be able to build those dungeons because you have to put more and more into it. I designed the system so that you can instantly create monsters that, like, if you wanted to create a monster or a villain that was level 15, that it wouldn't really take much more time for you to be able to make one who's level 500. And the game system does a lot for you to go as far as you want to go. You could be level 1 million if you really wanted to. The math is there, and it does allow you to, to manage it. But it's like, for example, if you want to know how much your stats are, it's based on your level. Unlike Dungeons and Dragons, where your stats are static and you only gain every so often, this game allows it for every time you gain a level, you gain 5 ability points to distribute amongst the 6 ability scores that you have. And those 6 ability scores add into your rolls. So, for example, if you're trying to bust down a door, you roll 2d6 plus your strength, and then any other modifiers that you might have, such as like muscle from your skills. So every time you gain a level, you gain 5. So the best way that I made it, because I made Genghis Khan the other day, and I think he was close to like level 450, if not higher, because of all the stuff that he did when he was alive as well as after he was dead. So what I did is just took his level times 5, and then I divided it by 6 to get kind of like the base score for each one. And so I then you could just adjust the numbers. So you take 10 off one score and you put it into another one, or you take 20 off another one, you put it, and then it gives you that quickness to be able to determine exactly what that person's stats are. And then there's a table that you can look at. Every 5th level you reach, you gain 1 skill point. Not level, sorry. Every 5 ability points that you have in one ability score, you gain 1 skill point. Every 10th position, you gain 2. So you just check the graph to see exactly where you're at, and it'll tell you how many points that you can distribute. So each time that I make an NPC, it can range anywhere between 5 minutes to 10 minutes just to create. That way I'm not spending, 2 hours trying to build an adventure with all these different statistics that I need. So even if you needed to, you could just say, hold on, players, I just got to make this person's statistic really quickly.
Nice. And I like systems where you can get where you can do things on the fly like that. Because it games like D&D, unless you've got some program that makes you NPCs on the fly, and then they're going to be generic. Whereas you've got a system where you can take a few moments and create something very specific that is necessary, that's needed for the storyline of the campaign, because your players have directed you a different path.
And I love templates. Templates are fun. Like the old school D&D, when you would become a vampire, you would just gain the vampire template. But then, they'd say, oh, well, you can only have one template at a time. I'm like, but why? Where's the fun in that? I want to be a werewolf vampire, or I want to be an alien vampire. I think that would be really cool if I could do those things.
And I'll tell you what, most of us didn't adhere to the one template thing. Like if templates popped up, I was like, yeah, undead werewolves popped up fairly often in games I played. When I allowed stuff like that.
Yeah, well, these are just guidelines more than rules.
Exactly. Who are you to tell me I can't do this?
Right? Who are you, the Adventurers League? What's going on here?
I love the concept of the Adventurers League, and I think Gary Gygax would have loved the idea of the Adventurers League, because most people don't realize that he really envisioned like structured league style kind of play from an early time, and it's kind of funny, people, because the game became so free form for so long. Now having something like Adventures League, people are like, I've run into people like, oh, I don't like Adventures League. That's not what the spirit of D&D was. And I was like, well, little do you know, that's really what Gary Gygax wanted a long time ago.
Well, it's a lot easier taking a character from the Adventurers League that's sanctioned and handing it off to another game and nobody raising an eyebrow at you. They're like, oh, no, okay, you're good.
Yeah. Unlike, back in the 90s, like, oh, hey, I got this character. I was playing another campaign. We're roughly the same level. Bring it over. And you're like, oh, time out. That character's broken in this system.
Right.
You're playing an ultra high magic campaign where you've got magic daggers, magic sword, magic armor, magic shoes, magic eyeglasses, hat. Your hair's magic. Like this party that you're trying to join has one magic item between the 4 of them.
Right? Let's not even talk about how many piercings that are magical that you have on your character.
I occasionally loved playing in really high magic campaigns, and the players would get all excited until they learned that they were living in a high magic world meant that so were all the bad guys.
Yup.
They were like, this is going to be awesome. Oh, man, David has equipped all... Like, why do goblins have magic daggers? Because magic is everywhere. We're playing in a high magic world, so even the lowliest things you're going to run into are going to be far more powerful than what you're used to.
Or all those goblins sitting in the dungeon. There's this, flame tongue longsword over here. Why don't we just use that?
Yeah,
No,
what?
that's for loot.
Yeah, why
That's
is it
adventure
sitting
loot. What
there?
are you doing?
Exactly.
Shut up, Gary.
Oh, sometimes I love giving the players what they want. It's like giving players wishes in games. You better word that right, otherwise I get to spend next 10 minutes trying to find a loophole in your wish. Uh,
I
they
think
say
that's the
the
whole
GM's
purpose of
not
the GM.
supposed to be against the players, but sometimes that's the most fun part.
It's like, you weren't clear.
Yes. Oh, you said what? I actually had here. Do you remember somebody had spelling errors in the wish they handed me? Which is I'm a horrible speller, so it was odd that I caught the spelling errors, and I'm just looking at it going, ooh.
Oh, don't feel bad. Even going through the books I published, I could fully admit that there are a few areas that needed correction. And it's just like, okay, well, I paid an editor. I went through it myself at least 6 to 7 times. But you know what? Even big publishers have the same issues, and sometimes even worse, as we were talking about earlier with Dark
The
Souls.
Dark Souls, yeah.
So
And
it happens.
exactly. And sometimes you I actually know somebody who did this. They only had about 150 books printed through their Kickstarter, and as soon as they got the books back, they just cracked the first page, and they're like, "I sent the wrong file."
No.
They sent the file that the pre-edit, so before it went to their editor for all the spelling corrections and everything. So everything was pretty much ready to go. It all the layout was really done and everything, but they sent it to someone to go and do all the spell checks and everything, and came back with bazillion spelling errors. And as soon as he opened it, because there was like a big blatant spelling error like on page one, and he opens it up, and he's like, no, and so he had to pay out of pocket to because it was his error, and he had to pay out of pocket to get the entire thing reprinted, and so he could mail them out. And it's like he's like the worst Kickstarter update you can send somebody, like, hey, I have the books in hand. No, you can't have any of them because I sent the wrong file.
We will get new ones printed. However, if you like to buy these, they are $29.95.
and you can
Please
see how
buy
bad
them
of a
at
speller.
$29.95.
Yes, for the love of all that's holy, buy them. You will have a rare misprint edition.
I'll even sign it, and it'll be worth 2 cents more on eBay.
Yeah, maybe if you're lucky, I'll misspell my name, and it'll be even worth even more. See, that would be my luck. I would misspell my own name. Like, how'd you do that? I don't know. um, what made you want to start, writing books and publishing and creating games? Because I always find that a bit of a fascinating journey for some people. My favorite was college kid. He was like, I'd never played a role-playing game before. My parents weren't really for them or against them. And he goes, college, I played D&D. He goes, oh, this is kind of cool. I want to make my own. And just made his own, put it up on Kickstarter, and was successful. I was like, well, you're not normal.
No, I've been writing since, I was practically able to pick up a pen. I went to young writers conferences when I was still in elementary and middle school, and I would go to college level lectures just to listen to the new writers talk about their new books and all that other jazz. And funny story, I even wrote a small story, or the beginnings of a novel called Thorn and a Rose, and it was about an anti-paladin. And I sent it to TSR, and surprisingly, I got a response back. Of course, I was 12, and the response back I got was quite positive. It was just telling me that these are the things that you need to fix. And of course, as a child, you see that, and you you don't see it as encouragement or this is your opportunity to get into the industry. You see it as, oh, they hated it. It's like, so I never responded back, but looking back on it, I was like, well, no, you fool, you could have done much better. You could have actually done the edits and the fixes and sent it back to them, and they could have maybe featured you in a magazine or something. You would have been awesome. But uh, the reason that I like started, so I went to college for a multitude of different things, but I ended up with creative writing in English and a few other things. But uh, my my whole idea was that I'd be a successful literary writer and I would write fiction. Now it just seems like I'm aiming more towards like middle grade and young adult fiction because that seems to be where more the people appreciate you are versus like a lot of adults you don't really get a huge response, but when you get like kids coming up to you like, oh, I loved your book, and it's just like, oh well, thank you, glad that you read it. But yeah, I've always loved reading and writing and making things, and I think now I'm making it because I don't actually have a play group. Occasionally I'll run an adventure with my spouse, or we might get together with some friends online and do it there. But now it just seems like I'm doing it sheerly out of nostalgia purposes because I love the game. I loved all the previous groups that I've been in. I'm trying to recapture that fun now as a very busy adult. It's kind of hard to do sometimes, but I think that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I've been the last few shows we've gotten a lot of couples that have young kids that are looking for those two-player games that they can play at home, and it's not really been. So you've had one player like journaling type games, and then you have GM-less games and all that, but the two-player game, as you were saying, you're playing with your spouse at home. I see that's kind of starting to grow because as we've been asked about it, I go on Kickstarter, I look around and I see more of these two-player games or GM-less two-player games popping up. So I think that's a really neat place that people can create and possibly tap into a market that is popping up, because you have a lot of people that have grown up as gamers, and if you grew up as gamer in the 80s or 90s, once you got married or whatever, you had kids, you kind of drifted away from playing because adult life took over, and or you try to find a way, and you're like, oh, okay, I can game once a month. And with virtual tabletop, we see a lot of people coming back into gaming that hadn't been able to find the time. But with these two-player games, it's really cool because I see a lot of couples that are now wanting to, hey, let's continue to game, but be responsible adults and stay home with the kid at the same time.
Right.
So it's a really kind of neat best of both worlds type thing. Now you might get tired of your gaming partner, and you're like, hey, we got to go out and get a bigger group.
Well, I don't see why they can't have adventures where it scales. Like you just have one box belong to 2 players and another box belonging to 3 and 4 players, and so on and so forth. I think that would be a great market to tap into if people were, if you could do it right. I mean, layout I think is important in those aspects. Just like ignore this section, but make sure you pay attention to this one.
Yeah. Oh, and that in RPGs that grow with the side with, because doing a 2-player then trying to turn a two, like, because a lot of the mechanics that'll work like in a 2-player may not work in a 3, 4, or 5-player game, or I ran into this many years ago. The playing a game that was originally Star Wars D6, we had 7 players. Then 3 years later, it was 7 GMs and 64 players. It was so rough because the game was not designed to scale. We had to make up a lot of rules. We ended up adapting a lot of live action style rules because trying to control that many people. Now that's an extreme example of scaling, but the largest game I've run outside of that was 16 players at a convention, and that was just a lot of managing people and expectations. It was still a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Also, building those rules.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say
I was
that's
just
also something I don't necessarily want to do again.
when I was in college, I had a group there was 9 people, and that was too much. It was just way too much for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
It Nobody could have a turn. Combat took forever. It's
Yeah, and a combat heavy game like D&D already struggles with 4 or 5 players because combat can just get bogged way down. So yeah, once you go over about 5 players, I think 6 is kind of the max of what D&D has ever really been allowed for any reasonable amount of time, because especially our one shots with the library at events, if you're running 6 players, you have to just blaze through combat as fast as possible. Otherwise, your entire 3 hour, 4 hour block just becomes combat, and it's no fun.
great.
Well, I take it back. They're you get the dice chuckers that be like, that was the most fun ever. I love dice chuckers. They're a lot of fun to play with too.
It's like I'm just here for the rolls.
Um, so we've talked a little bit about some of your upcoming projects. Are there any other kind of irons in the fire that you are working on that aren't your second edition or the X game?
Uh, so this game's already written, and it's been sitting on my shelf for 2 years, I think. Reason that it's been sitting on there for a while is that I decided that I wanted to write a young adult coming of age story that was based in this world. And unfortunately, the way that traditional publishing works is that if you have anything that is remotely published is part of it, it's your new work is now tainted. So they'll never pick it up. Like, for example, I wrote the Lights Out series. There's 4 books. There's the 5th one that's almost out. I just have to work on editing and getting the illustrations into it, and hopefully that'll be out soon. But we'll see. Uh, but what happens is that I can't take the Lights Out series, even if I were to write a new book. I can't take it to an agent, and they will be interested to marketing it off to one of the major publishing houses, because it's already out. People have seen it. They can't market it. It's pretty much a dead duck. So what I decided to do is that instead of publishing this tabletop role-playing game, I instead am going to write the book, see if I can get it through traditional publishing channels, and if that doesn't work, which I give it about 2 years, then I'll probably throw it into a Kickstarter. But it's the concept behind it. It's called Blades and Ballet, and I used to dance at the University of Iowa, and several years before that I was just classically trained in ballet. And everybody, when they think of ballet, they look at the adagios. That's the slow, graceful movements of the ballerina, and the swooning and everything else. And it's kind of boring to most people who aren't like. It's kind of like football. If people who grew up with football and played football love football, and people who grew up with ballet and dance ballet love ballet. So if you're not one of those people, then watching an adagio is boring. But there's allegros, which are very fast and rapid motions. That's where they leap really high and they perform these just amazing feats of strength and dexterity.
When they show commercials for like Nutcracker every year, they show the handful of like exciting bits. They'll be like, "Come see the Nutcracker live," and it'll be those kind of handful of bits, and then nobody realizes the rest of it is the slower portion.
Right. It's like you're gonna watch the Russian dances and you're gonna absolutely adore that, but the rest is kind of a snooze. But
Yes.
yeah, so it's my thought is that dancers are probably one of the most trained and athletic sports, athletic people in the world. The amount of strength and training that they have to go through is just insane. So my thought was, well, put them in their own world, where they have these titanic kaiju type monsters that are destroying their civilizations, and the only way to kill them is to, because they're still in a fantasy setting and their magic isn't up to snuff. They don't really have the ability to launch fireballs or anything like that. So their only option is either siege weaponry, which does very little against them, or they train these people from birth to be able to breach through like this parallel border realm. It's what they call is the glass, and once they shatter through it, the person is infused with this divine energy, and so the only way that they're able to tap into that is through passion and through their dance. And so it's kind of like they now have super strength, and they can jump thousands of feet into the air, and they can land without getting harmed. But they can still take blows, but not many of them. So the only way that they can boost themselves up is by partnering with each other. So you would have in the game, you would have characters who would be your soloists, and you would have the other ones who would focus on the pot of dew portions. So the pot of dew people would throw down cards, and that would boost the other players to add their stats to be able to make higher and more damaging attacks towards these titanic monsters. And so instead of being in a battlefield where you have trees and rocks and mountains and stuff like that you have to traverse, instead the battlefield is the monster. You're trying to find the hidden weak points to be able to destroy it. So I even went so crazy and designed, I called it a Puro Lance, but they have to like chuck it up into the air, and then they have to assemble it as they're falling down to the earth, and they have to strap themselves into it where they start doing like massive pirouettes to be able to get it's like a giant drill to get the motors to start rotating, and so then they can use the drill to like pierce through the hardened shell of the creature. So it's very out there, and it's very unique, but at the same time I think it's a little exciting to those people who enjoy ballet. But
Yeah.
so I'm writing a story that's focused on that, and that's where the iron is right now. The game itself is done. It needs to be play tested, maybe some additional artwork, but for the most part, it's good to go.
I like the idea of it because, I mean, you're making a story in a book or in a game for, you know, a bit of a niche audience, but maybe you'll get lucky and you'll get some people that pick it up that aren't into dance. They go, oh, hey, let me check this out, and now kind of open their world up to, you know, something else. Because I'm not a huge ballet guy, but I've been a couple times. I'll go to the ballet long before I go to the opera. Just never been an opera person.
Right.
Just opera's never been my thing. At least ballet, there's stuff going on. I've enjoyed the few shows I've gone to. It's just, you know, given other options, I'll play a role playing game. Might be why, you know, because you grew up doing dance, and it's kind of that you have still have a passion in there for it. I grew up in, you know, selling comic books and role playing games to people, so that might be why the library exists. Grew up in a family store, so
You gotta look at things realistically. Like ballet is in decline because it's the same stories, it's the same dance, and you have to say what's the exciting part of anything, and you have to take those parts and then you combine them with other exciting parts, and then you can make something, you know, decent that's maybe not so niche, but at the same time, you know, is applies to other people who may not normally look at this type of thing. So it's unusual. I mean, Lights Out, I only created it because I go to anime conventions, and I wanted to make something that was anime-like that people would enjoy, and it took on a life of its own.
nice. And I grew up liking anime in the '80s when it wasn't really a thing yet in the U.S. But it's because I grew up in and around the military, and I would get stuff that back from Japan that was recorded off of TV in Japan by, you know, airmen and their families. They're like, oh yeah, we brought this really cool thing back. You're like, what is it? You're like, I have no clue what's going on, but this is amazing. That's the anime I grew up on. No clue what was going on. It was all in Japanese, and just staring at it in amazement, just making up my own stories. Like, no clue what they were saying.
That's like what happened with Half Off. It's on YouTube. It's they got the video, but they didn't get the audio. nor did they get the scripts. So they took a swim, uh, basically a swim anime, and they threw their own track to it, and it's just absolutely hilarious.
There's a company out, I think they're out of New York, Vinegar Syndrome. They've been saving movies, and originally started saving old adult films that they were trying to purchase old adult films and save them because they were like, hey, this is an artwork that no one is preserving. And I was like, that's kind of an interesting direction to go with this. And then while they were doing that, they bought a an old film house, and they found in there. So they've been restoring and saving and digitizing other you know B B grade movies and awesome stuff. So Vinegar Syndrome has a ton of crazy fun movies to watch. But through this, they found a film that a completed film. It was like filmed in like the late '80s, and all they had were the reels of the movie, no audio, no script, no nothing. So they digitized everything, and then they tried to write a script that matched the lips. So they were lip reading and trying to guess what the people were saying and trying to make a story out of what they had. And then they hired voice actors to come in and read. And I forget the name of the movie, but they put this out, and it's glorious. It's just it they had no audio track for it at all. No idea what was going on. It's just like you were saying with the anime. They made it up with this found film that, if it wasn't for them, would have been lost to time. So these people's work would have never been shared, even though they couldn't find anything to do with the original audio or script. They were able to put out this small company's movie 35 years later with their own story. I love stuff like that, and jokingly makes me think of role-playing games, because we're taking someone's story and then we're making up our own stories within that.
Right? I used to always be afraid that I'd somehow mess with the canon, and then I realized who's listening, who's watching, who really cares. In the end, it's just about having fun.
And I thought about those things in the '90s when, especially when I was getting the Encyclopedia Magicas that were coming out for D&D. And it's like all the magic items ever that have been created. And then at one point I was like, man, it'd be awesome if I had my own magic items in here. I was like, oh, these are just the magic items those people made up. I was like, man, there's so many magic items out there that I will never encounter because some guy like me or some girl sitting in a basement with her friends or family or whatever made up their own magic items and their own bad guys and their own stories. And it's like, oh, this is like, it's so cool that we're all playing the same game, but yet not. And the same's true with any role-playing game. You pick up any role-playing game. The beauty of it is you're sitting down with other people and you're doing collaborative storytelling. I know some writers that actually will take notebooks to they'll go play one-shots and stuff, and they'll take notebooks with them, and they'll take notes and get story ideas. And I love that.
So, you don't mind if I memorialize this in a novel, do you?
Exactly. Like, well, I like what you did there. Do you mind if your character comes to life in one of my future books? Oh, I'd be remiss. So one of our Patreon supporters always asks us to ask this question: hot dogs or tacos?
I love tacos to death, but I found, that as I aged, that my body is just finding that, like, for example, I can no longer have lactose anymore. That I discovered 2 years ago, and that was fun. That was a huge shift in my diet, and I've lost like cheese, and I've lost the ability to drink milk, and so I have to find new ways to eat. Like, I found this cheese that it's like cheese, it's just 3 times as much and is not cheese. It doesn't have quite the same taste. It's it's close, but it's not the same. So whenever I go out to like uh, any type of a restaurant that sells tacos, Mexican restaurants, or just your Tex-Mex or whatnot, I always have to tell them no cheese, and
Oh,
it feels like I'm eating a third of a taco. Like it's
you're
lost a portion of its soul.
you're missing something.
Hot dogs are alright, but I could eat tacos all day.
And you know, I love both, and I love them for entirely different reasons. But and we always joke like, is a hot dog a taco? Uh, uh, and
Yes.
apparently in the chat, cheese is a very important part of tacos. Um, but I've said that you kind of have like within North America, you kind of have three kind of varieties of tacos. You have the fast food taco, whether it be Taco Time or Taco Bell or whatever. Then you've got your restaurant tacos, and you got your food truck tacos, and they're all kind of, no matter where you go, you're gonna find something very similar, which is awesome because you pretty much know what you're gonna get when you go to any one of those places. But the cool thing with a hot dog is, no matter where you go, that town probably has a specialty hot dog. Like the Seattle dog is grilled onions and cream cheese, which sounds horrible until you eat it. But then you've got a Chicago dog, you've got a Coney Island dog, you've got, there's a million ways to do a hot dog. And I mean, there are a million ways to do tacos, but when you get tacos, they kind of fit into one of those three categories. You're going to get one of the fast food, the restaurant, or the street trucks. And I love them all, but
Though Chicago's like the only place in the world that I'm aware of where you could order a taco, or not a taco, you could order a hot dog, and if you put ketchup on it, you get shamed.
yes,
It's 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 like wow.
Chicago's a very strange place for food. Um, Even though I love Chicago
The
style
pizza is
pizza,
under the sun.
I'll never order Chicago style pizza while in Chicago because it is a weird place to eat. I lived in and around Chicago, so uh, yeah, that is not a fun place to eat. um,
It's like I just want food. Just
yeah,
just let me eat my food.
like, what are you doing? You're gonna do it wrong. Like, it's how I want to eat my hot dog. Leave me alone. Let me eat my wiener in my own fashion. Um, so something else we like to do, and I don't think Carissa included on the email. We like to do. We're trying to get back to doing these player character confessionals. So you tell us about a character, and somebody in the chat said Chicago style pizza is what you get when you want lasagna. Chicago style pizza and lasagna are not the same thing. See, New York style is what you get when you want one slice. It's going to be big, and you can eat it while you're walking. Chicago style is something where you want a tasty thing that's going to be like one slice is going to be a meal, and it's not lasagna. They're entirely different because I don't have pasta interlaced inside of my Chicago style pizza. It's a little bread with a whole lot of stuff on top. I'll accept that some people call it a pizza casserole. I can deal with that over lasagna. So, anyways, player character confessional. Uh, um, so you'll tell us about the character. So it's half dwarf, half drow, named Bob. D&D Third Edition, was a thief, and then you pause, and then in character. Well, there I was. I was standing there with the loot that we were seeking, and I was on the ledge by the exit, and the red dragon woke up, and the rest of the party was down there, and well, he started to attack, and if I would have joined in, they'd still be around, but I would have had to split the loot, something that something you've done in character that character needs to confess about.
All right. Um, so probably the funniest one I have is Doug. He's a halfling. He's from second edition Dungeons and Dragons, and Doug is a very strange character. He was once challenged by a half orc to duel, and he always carried this long saber that was at least 2 feet long, and he had this eloquent, well, very detailed handle that was shoved into it, and he would go through this long monologue about how amazing he was and how feared he was across the lands. And then when he finally spoke his name, "My name is Doug. Prepare to die." He'd pull out his weapon. It was actually a dagger, no more than about an inch long, and he would stab repeatedly in the air to challenge the orc. He would always get laughed out of these duels, and he would put his sword away. And he says, "I see that you have conceded that I am now victorious. Have a good day." Turns around and leaves. But the confessional, the biggest confessional, would be when Doug was taking the party through a dungeon, and he encountered what he perceived to be a trap. And he told everybody, he's like, "Now listen, everyone. We have to get into a single file line, and you have to do exactly what I do. Otherwise, we're going to spring the trap that we're now in the middle of, and we're all going to die." And so he would slowly walk through, shifting his leg, holding it up high, stepping over something invisible, ducking under something. And meanwhile, everybody else is having to perform these, dexterity checks and agility checks. And thing was is that Doug never did perceive a trap. And then when he was just waiting for somebody to fail. And as soon as they did, he'd get out of line and he'd go back to the end and say, "Hey, you have to start over from the beginning." And so he would send them all the way back, and they'd have to go through it all over again to make sure that the trap was never triggered. There were many traps that Doug claimed to have found, but never did. He just wanted to see if people would be able to do what he said.
I like Doug. Doug could be an amazingly fun character within a world.
Doug never fought anyone. Never. He only gained experience by gold gain.
Yeah, no one plays enough Dougs in the world. Everybody wants to be the superhero of the party, not the creative one that finagles their way around a whatever is needed at the time.
It's like, are you here just to ruin everything? To make life harder for the rest of the PCs? Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. I've played a few characters like that over the years. It's a blast. They could be you have to play them right so that they don't annoy the party, because that ruins the game. But you've got to play them enough so that you play them just right so that they're annoyingly fun.
Well, if you try to take the spotlight too much, then people say that this is just too much. But those small little snippets where you can get other people to laugh, even the ones who actually are the brunt of the joke, then that's where it all is at.
Yeah, and I guarantee that players over the years that you played with have had, like, "Oh God, I've got this story about Doug."
It's like, let me tell you about a player character that I will never play with again.
I probably have a few of those stories that I should dig out and tell. Well, we've been going for a little while now. Is there anything that you would like to talk about before we close this up for the day?
If anyone is interested, I do have a Lights Out bundle on Drive-Thru RPG. It's all digital. It gets you the core rules. I think there's an adventure, the character record sheets, and then all 4 of the chapter books, and it's $2.50.
Oh wow!
So I could send that to you in a live if you wanted to.
Yeah, if you can send us out, because I have Nightingale Publishing pulled up. But I don't. It doesn't necessarily pull up the bundle when you search for you.
The book itself is like over 400 pages, so it's pretty thick. Like I have one sitting here just to show you what, at least as things fall all over the place. So this is how thick the actual book is itself. It's kind of like a tome that everybody talks about. But the digital ones, I mean, it's just as thick, but it's got a lot of information in there. It's already gotten a couple medals so far. I think we're in silver. My goal is to just try to build those medals up, just for fun. Plus, it gets the game out there.
Um, where do you see the medals? I never actually thought of. I never paid attention to the whole medals thing on. Oh yeah, best silver seller.
If you can get up to platinum, it's good because then over in DM's Guild, they don't let you do physical copies. Like I could write a Ravenloft book, and I have actually. I've written a few Ravenloft accessories in the DM's Guild, but I can't publish those on my own. I can't print them out. I mean, I can print them out for fun, but I can't turn around and
Yeah.
sell them. But if you have a platinum in like Drive Through RPG, then you can make physical copies available to people in DMG. So that's a little perk. Other than that, it's just kind of gives people an idea of how many copies you sold.
Yeah, if you share us the bundle, we'll make sure that we put it in the notes for the YouTube video, and then we can share it. Let's see. I don't know how to share it post stream on Twitch, um, but if you get me that
I
link,
Yeah, I shot it in
oh,
the live chat that we
oh,
share.
I see it now there.
That might help.
Uh,
I've also been running a bookstore, and I'm not gonna throw my URL down. I think that's kind of in poor taste. But one thing that I found that when I was young, I was like, I would just want my books in a bookstore. And it's like, well, I mean, you could do books on consignment, but you're gonna lose a lot of money, and you don't get to see people's faces. So it's a lot. I found that it's a lot easier to sell your own books when you sell other people's books alongside it.
and give us a link to your bookstore.
All right, since you asked.
I'd forgot before we went live. You said you were running a bookstore, because we love bookstores.
Yeah, I try to curate as much titles as I possibly can. Of course, I'm small, so I can't order everything. But uh, yeah, going to conventions. It also running a bookstore gives you this strange amount of authority. People suddenly think that you know a lot of things, or that you're in with a lot of people. Like I could talk with comic book writers now without
Yeah.
them not even responding. They'll actually respond to me, which is so bizarre. It's just like all you have to do is apply for a bookstore tax license and then start ordering through distributors, and then suddenly
we're
you have an authority.
we're a 501c3 educational thing, so the library has opened up a lot of interesting things. Yeah, go into your page, in your featured collection. You've got the Junior Braves Survival Guide. If you've not read the graphic novels, I absolutely suggest you read the graphic novels. One of the that's made local to where I am, and know one of the writers, and it's such a great little story. And there's some there, partway through the second book will just it'll just tear your heart out at one point. But the RPG is also a lot of fun.
Now, for your library, do you just do tabletop role-playing games, or you do a bunch of other stuff?
Just tabletop role playing games. So we start out with 348 books out of my house, and we now have somewhere north of 6,000 books in the library.
Wow.
From 27, so we're at 5.5 years, a little over 5.5 years. So March of 2017 is our first event, and we weren't named or anything at the time. It was just I was one of the staff members, and had to ask the question of why is nobody done a role playing game library? There's board game libraries, and then the manager of the
Probably
game.
because
Well, yeah, managing it is bonkers. And then even when you look at the mechanics of having an event, anybody can pick up a board game, sit down with some friends, play it, put it away, and they're done. And that's one of the cool things with a board game, but also one of the negative aspects of a board game is once you've played it, you've played it. And you may never play that again, you may never play with the same people again, but with a role playing game, you pick it up and you learn the rules, and then you sit down with your friends and you start telling stories, and you want to play more. And it's this continuing experience, whereas board games very often are a one-off experience.
Do you actually have people return the tabletop role-playing games after they check them out?
So they can borrow them during the event. They have to come
Okay.
back. Yeah, they don't unless you're like one of our staff members. So we have a handful of volunteers that have been to a ton of events with us, and they can borrow books long term. But if you're just coming to the show, we'll bring GMs with us, and then we'll curate a selection of books to go to that event. So if we're going to an anime convention, we pull out everything anime. If we're going to a horror convention, everything horror. Going to a comic convention, we make sure we load up on superhero comic book based RPGs, and then we fill in a bunch of other stuff as well. But then the venues will give us a place to set up, and then they usually give us a handful of tables, and then we provide a place for people, space for people to game. And some places will get, oh man, I haven't seen this in years. Can I run a game? And then they'll borrow the book, and they'll sit down with like friends and family and run third edition Gamma World or something like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Or we just get people, like I have seen people borrow books and just sit in the hallway reading a book, just absorbing the rules, going, this was so cool. Like, can I take pictures? I'm like, go ahead. And they take a picture of the cover and like, I've got to go find this. I want to play this game with friends now.
And if you use our affiliate link, you get 10% off.
Yeah, we really need to work on the affiliate link thing, because we should start doing that. Like, hey, you need to get an eBay affiliate link, because that's where some of these are only available.
I know Modifist does it for, I think you get like 20%, and then there's drive-through, I think is only like 4 or 6% somewhere in there. But still, every little thing helps. It kind of builds once you get a bunch of people.
Exactly, and we have a ton of books that are only available on drive-through, and when it's stuff that's available through distributors, I really try to get people to go back to their local game stores, their local bookstores, and order stuff locally, because you can't play D&D on Amazon. Now, D&D is trying to make it where you can only play online, but that's a whole different thing. I still want people to go play Magic at their local game store. I want them to play Warhammer 40K or whatever tabletop mini game that they're playing. I want them to play at their local game stores. I want them to play at least some RPG games at their local game stores. Buy and support your local game store, because that's where you meet other local gamers, and that's where you can discover a lot of really cool things.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I spent the majority of my youth, was in a game store, playing Magic the Gathering or talking to people about role-playing games.
I literally spent most of my youth at a game store, because and when I was 4, my parents opened a bookstore that became a comic book store that became a comic book and game store, and then there was a couple points in our lives where we moved to a new city, and we lived in the back of the store and ran the store out of the front. So I literally grew up in a game store. I think about 10 years of my life, maybe 8 years of my life, I lived inside of the store at different times. So running a small business, not really all that profitable most of the time.
Right.
So, best way to find you online or connect with you?
Anything really. I mean, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. In fact, I think a lot of my links are on the nrmbooks.com. You can find me there. But if you want to follow me as far as just wanting to know updates on like Spooks 2nd edition, Lights Out 2nd edition, all those other books I had mentioned, you could just go to Nathan Maher, for Facebook. I think it's just facebook.com/Nathan Maher, and you'd find me. And you could send me messages, or you could leave me comments. I'll respond typically within 24, 48 hours, if not sooner. I'm usually easily available.
Nice. Well, it's been awesome talking to you. I have a follow-up appointment that just showed up to the house, so I have to let you go. So everybody tuning in at home, check out Nathan's books. Check out his drive-through link. That is a great way to get access to a bunch of cool stuff. And if you're if you want to order some books, you have the link to his bookstore. I'm sure that you ship as well.
Yeah,
So
hand ship it. It's fun.
so when you open it up and you get this cool book and there's a hand inside, he took it literally.
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding. Thank you all.
I regenerate hands, so it's fine.
Yeah, just another one. Thank you all for tuning in, but the library is now closed, and tomorrow we'll be back with news and Kickstarter, and we got a ton of cool books yesterday from a bookstore that was at the event we were at, and cannot wait to share the really, really cool things. And, well, you got a sneak peek of one of them already. So, till next time, everybody, you have a wonderful day, and the library is now closed.